Hello friends, I am Bindu from the Department of Psychology. I am Associate Professor over there, and I will be introducing you the topic on epilepsy. In this session, we will be discussing what is epilepsy, how is it different from a seizure, what precipitates an epileptic attack, what are the different types of epilepsy, and how is an epileptic attack managed, and what is the treatment method available for epilepsy. Epilepsy, as you all may be knowing, is a neurological condition that affects the nervous system. The term epilepsy means seizures, which is a disturbance in the electrical activity of the brain. Epilepsy is also known as a seizure disorder. The seizures in epilepsy may be related to brain injury, genetics, brain structure, or metabolic cause, but most of the time the cause is unknown. As epilepsy manifests itself in a great variety of ways, it is difficult to define. The problem is aggravated by the vast array of terms which has been and continue to be used to define the same or very similar conditions. Epileptic episodes have been called convulsions, seizures, fits, and attack. But none of these terms on its own is entirely satisfactory because the character of the episodes can vary greatly. In epilepsy, a person suffers recurrent seizures of various types that register on an electroencephalogram and are associated with disturbances of consciousness. Epilepsy is usually diagnosed after a person has had at least 2 seizures or after 1 seizure with a high risk for more that were not caused by some known medical condition. Episodic seizures are common. 1 person in 20 will experience at least 1 seizure in his or her lifetime. The prevalence of multiple seizures is much lower, however, about 1 in 200. Epileptic seizures are classified as symptomatic seizures if they can be identified with a specific cause such as infection, trauma, tumor, malformation, toxic chemicals, very high fever, or other neurological disorders. They are called idiopathic seizures if they appear to arise spontaneously and in the absence of other disease of the central nervous system. A great variety of circumstances appear to be able to precipitate seizures. Although the range of these circumstances is striking, a consistent feature is that the brain is most epileptogenic when it is relatively inactive and the patient is sitting still. Although epilepsy has long been known to run in families, its incidence is lower than a one-gene genetic model would predict. What is more likely is that certain genotypes have a predisposition to seizure problems given certain environmental circumstances. The most remarkable clinical feature of epileptic disorders is the widely varying length of intervals between attacks, which can be from minutes to hours to weeks or even years. In fact, it is almost impossible to describe a basic set of symptoms to be expected in all or even most people with the disorder. At the same time, 3 particular symptoms are found in many types of epilepsy. 1, an aura or warning of impending seizure. So this aura may take the form of a sensation, an odor, or a noise, or it may simply be a feeling that the seizure is going to take place. Second is loss of consciousness, ranging from complete collapse in some people to staring off into space in others. Loss of consciousness is often accompanied by amnesia, in which the victim forgets the seizures itself and the periods of lost consciousness. 3 is movement. Seizures commonly have a motor component, although their characteristics vary considerably. Some people shake during an attack, others exhibit automatic movements such as rubbing the hands or chewing. A diagnosis of epilepsy is usually confirmed by an EEG. In some epileptics, however, seizures are difficult to demonstrate in this way except under special circumstances, for example, in an EEG recorded during sleep. Moreover, not all persons with an EEG suggestive of epilepsy actually have seizures. In fact, Some estimates suggest that 1 person in 5 has an abnormal EEG pattern, which is many more than the number of people thought to suffer from epilepsy. Several schemes for classifying epilepsy have been published through the years. 4 commonly recognized types of seizures are focal seizures, generalized seizures, kinetic seizures, and myoclonic seizures. Now let's study focal or partial seizures. A focal seizure, as the name itself implies, begins in one place and then spreads. Partial seizures are of different kinds. Partial seizures can be with elementary symptomatology without impairment of consciousness. It can be with motor symptoms, with sensory or somatosensory symptoms, with autonomic symptoms. Partial seizures can also be with complex symptomatology, with impairment of consciousness only, with cognitive or affective or sensory or psychomotor symptomatology. Then there are unilateral seizures and unclassified seizures which do not belong to any of the above classifications. Partial seizures, as we have just seen, they are termed also as focal seizures since they reflect a neuronal discharge which is more or less localized to one area of the brain. They are divided into 2 main types, those with elementary and those with complex symptomatology. The former type, that is, those with elementary symptomatology, characteristically occur without any loss of consciousness, while some impairment of the conscious state of mind is found with complex partial seizures. Now you can see this figure. So this is a picture of partial seizure with elementary symptomatology. So towards the left you can see the picture of a person before the seizure, and towards the right you can see the jerking of the right half of the face and the patient is fully conscious. Simple partial seizures with motor symptoms may take many forms and point to the localization mainly in portion of the region in front of the central or Rolandic fissure, though the focal abnormality may lie in the temporal or parietal region. Sensory symptoms may take the form of any of the sense modalities, that is, somatosensory phenomena or sensations referable to the special senses of vision, audition, and olfaction in particular. So this is a figure. You can see the central fissure, and you can also find motor symptoms, then somatosensory symptoms, visual symptoms, auditory symptoms, as well as autonomic symptoms. Patients differ a good deal in their ability to describe their symptoms, and carefully phrased questions may be of value in localization. Symptoms of autonomic disturbance rarely occur without other symptoms. Next, we'll learn about complex partial seizures. Since these seizures present so frequently with symptoms of disruption of higher mental functions, they have become of increasing interest to neuropsychologists. Frequently, the onset of seizures, or aura as it is usually called, is signaled by a subjective feeling or behavior referable to a particular area. Though many attacks recur frequently in the same manner in some patients, there are other cases where the initial warning symptoms or auras vary from one seizure to the next, so that care must be taken in using the signs and symptoms associated with any single attack as localizing indications. Where the lesion is fairly well circumscribed, it may lend itself to surgical removal. This has been particularly successful in certain refractory cases of lesions restricted to the temporal lobes, where the removal of the temporal lobe, or temporal lobectomy as it is often called, may completely cure or generally ameliorate the condition. The portions of the cortex which may be involved in complex partial seizures are the frontal, temporal, and parietal neocortex and the subcortical structures associated with them. The clinical features which distinguish the different subgroups are often present in the same patient, either in one attack or at different times, and may be accompanied by impaired consciousness which may obscure the picture. The main types can be grouped as follows. 1. There are cases where impairment of consciousness is a principal or even the sole symptom. Second, there are psychomotor attacks where the principal symptoms are confusion and automatic behavior. Confusional automatisms may be merely a mechanical prolongation of the behavior in which the patient was engaged at the onset of the attack, or the automatisms may represent new behavior beginning during the attack. So many forms of automatisms have been given descriptive labels. For example, there are so-called ambulatory automatisms in which the patient may carry out coordinated movements of some complexity during the attack and for a varying time after the seizure. There are verbal automatisms, gestural automatisms, and the like. Another type of seizure are those with sensory illusions. The nature of these seizures varies with the region of the cortex, which is the site of the discharge. Where the primary projection area of the cortex is involved, the phenomena are simple sensory experience, where the alteration of perception of present stimuli, where there is alteration of the perception of present stimuli, while in cases where the association areas are involved, it gives rise to what is known as integrated perceptual experience, which, since they occur in the absence of appropriate stimuli in the environment, have earned the title hallucination. Once again, a careful examination of the patient's experience may point to the affected area. The illusions may be related to a specific sense modality, that is, it could be visual, auditory, olfactory, somesthetic illusions, or when the discharge affects the borderland between parietal, temporal, and occipital areas, compound illusions may also occur. A special form of alteration in sense experience occurs with some temporal lobe seizures, so that present experience is interpreted in a manner quite different from usual. New situations or objects may be perceived as having been seen or heard before, in which case it is known as Deja Vu or Deja Entendu, which means seen before, or familiar ones as not having been experienced before, in which case it is known as Jamais Vu or Jamais Entendu, which means never seen, never heard. So you can, another type of complex partial seizures may produce sudden alteration in emotional state, usually in the form of fear. In other cases, disturbances of memory and thought processes may occur during temporal lobe seizures. Finally, it is common for simple symptomatology to be followed by the more complex, or there may be an admixture of both. Partial seizures may at times progress to generalized seizures. So this is the picture. You can find that the complex partial seizures can occur from any part of the brain, frontal, parietal, posterior temporal gyrus, occipital, or any part of the brain. As you can see, there is impairment of consciousness, cognitive affective symptoms are there, dream-like state, blank vacant expression, deja vu, that is new experiences perceived as seen or heard before, jamais vu, where familiar ones are perceived as not seen or never seen, never heard. Then there are psychomotor disturbances, auditory hallucination, visual, olfactory hallucination, psychomotor phenomena like chewing movements, wetting of lips, automatisms like picking at clothing, etc. can be observed. An early description of an olfactory hallucination associated with temporal lobe lesion was given by Huglings-Jackson in 1890. Known as Jacksonian focal leisure, it begins with jerking movements in one part of the body, for example, a finger, a toe, or the mouth, and then spreads to adjacent parts. If the attack begins with the finger, the jerks might spread to the other finger, then the hand, the arm, and so on, producing the so-called Jacksonian march. Then we'll learn about unilateral seizures. In this type of disorder, the discharge, while spread over a wide area, is restricted to one hemisphere and demonstrates itself by clinical phenomena on the opposite or contralateral side of the body. The excessive neuronal discharge causing the seizure may arise in the centrincephalon, from where it spreads exclusively or mainly to the hemisphere on one side, or the discharge may originate in a local region of the cerebral cortex of one hemisphere, spread to the centrincephalon, from where it projects in turn to the whole of that hemisphere. The reason for considering these unilateral seizures as separate from partial seizures is that there are no signs in the periods between the seizures of clinical or EEG features of localized brain impairment, and such seizures may alternate from side to side, from one attack to another, or even during the course of a single attack. As with generalized seizures, unilateral seizures have been classified into a number of subtypes according to the symptomatology. Next, we'll learn about generalized seizure. Generalized seizures are bilaterally symmetrical without focal onset. One such type is a grand mal attack. Grand mal means great illness, is characterized by loss of consciousness and by stereotyped motor activity. This type of seizures typically comprises 3 stages. One is tonic stage, in which the body stiffens and breathing stops. Second is clonic stage, in which there is rhythmic shaking. And 3 is post seizures, also called post-ictal depression, during which the patient is confused. About 50% of these seizures precede by an aura. So let us study each in detail. Types of generalized seizures: tonic, clonic seizures. The term tonic clonic seizures describes the 2 main phases of the paroxysm. Paroxysm means abnormal electric discharge, in which was previously termed as grand mal seizures. So you can see in the picture, grand mal, in the tonic phase, the muscles contract and the subject often falls to the ground. Contraction of respiratory muscles produce a grunt or cry. Swallowing is lost and the patient becomes cyanosed from lack of oxygen. Contraction of muscles often produce incontinence of urine and less commonly of feces. This is followed by the clonic phase, during which it's for a very brief time, few seconds to minutes, and is marked by rhythmic contractions of limb and trunk muscles. After a variable time, the clonic phase ceases and the patient passes from stupor, the confusion, to a normal conscious state. On some occasions, one generalized seizure may follow another in rapid succession, in which case it is called as status epilepticus. Generalized seizures may be primary or may be precipitated from a localized focus. The primary form of epilepsy was often referred to as centrincephalic epilepsy. The term centrincephalin was introduced by Penfield to refer to those neural systems which are centrally placed in the upper brainstem and symmetrically connected with both cerebral hemispheres, and which serve to coordinate their function. The second type of seizures is the absent seizures. Absent seizures are also known as petit mal or small illness. In petit mal attack, there is loss of awareness, during which there is no motor activity except for blinking, turning the head, or rolling the eyes. This is largely a disorder of childhood, its prolongation into adult life being very rare. The attacks are characteristically brief, usually only a few seconds, with an abrupt onset and termination. The patient's ongoing activity is disturbed with interruption of mental functions and sudden resumption of activity after the absence. These attacks are of brief duration, seldom exceeding about 10 seconds. The EEG shows a characteristic spike and wave pattern during the attacks, and often bursts of such activity can be seen in the record even when no disturbance of ongoing activity is seen clinically. About 1/3 of children with absence also have tonic-clonic seizures. Then we'll learn about akinetic seizures. Akinetic seizures are commonly seen only in children. Usually, an affected child collapses suddenly and without warning. These seizures are often of very short duration, and the child may get up after only a few seconds. The fall can be dangerous, however, and common recommendation is to have the children wear football helmet until the seizures can be controlled by medications. Myoclonic spasms are massive seizures that basically consist of a sudden flexion or extension of the body and often begins with a cry. Now we'll move on to the treatment of epilepsy. The treatment of choice for epilepsy is an anticonvulsant drug such as diphenylhydantoin or DPH, Dilantin, its commercial name. phenobarbital, or one of several others. These drugs inhibit the recharge of abnormal neurons by stabilizing the neuronal membrane. If medication fails to alleviate the seizures problem satisfactorily, surgery can be performed to remove the focus of abnormal functioning in patients with focal seizures. Before we wind up, I strongly recommend you to go through the following YouTube on epilepsy to get a clear understanding of the various types of epilepsies which we have discussed in this session, how to identify it, and what can be done to help the patient under such circumstances. These are the references. Thank you.